What we have seen is a perfect example of the underhand collusion that has existed for so long between immoderate defenders of Israeli extremism and figures at the top of the Conservative Party, both inside and outside Parliament. They've tried to threaten me, but I will not be bullied or silenced. I was interviewed on April the 4th by Nick Ferrari of LBC. In that interview, I called for an arms embargo and also accused some senior Conservative figures of not believing that illegal settlements were indeed illegal. I also accused them of promoting Netanyahu's extreme policies to the point where some should be sacked from the then government or expelled from the House of Lords. Now, what happened then is a political scandal which discredits the Conservative Party and which amounts to a McCarthyite witch hunt which is nothing less than despicable. I was contacted by the press, who had been told I was accused of being anti-Semitic and was to be put into the party's complaints procedure under threat of expulsion. Nobody at that stage from the party had contacted me. The party refused to tell me who had complained or what precisely the complaint was. All I had to go on were some comments to the press by the likes of the Board of Deputies of British Jews and the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism, and they accused me of peddling anti-Semitic tropes. I mean, this merely followed the regular pattern of comments from such organizations in which anyone who criticizes Israel is more often than not viciously accused of being anti-Semitic. The party broke all its own rules by telling the press before telling me, by not saying what clause of their code I was supposed to have violated, and by refusing to give me a copy of the complaint I was required to answer. I nonetheless was required to offer a defense. So rather than just resign from the party in disgust, I engaged lawyers at considerable personal expense to see off what I considered were false allegations. It was therefore hardly surprising that CCHQ withheld their adjudication for a number of weeks until after the general election. I have now received the panel's findings. Their exact words are as follows. I quote, "The panel concluded that the complaint could not be upheld for two reasons. One, the respondents' comments did not go beyond political debate and so were not regulated by the code. And or, two, as a matter of fact in this case, the respondents' comments were not anti-Semitic and could not properly be regarded as such." Unquote. I have thus been totally exonerated. Where anti-Semitism genuinely exists, it should be ruthlessly called out. But it should not be artificially used to divert attention from legitimate comment on Israel. The perverse, and I would argue corrupt, relationship between the Conservative Friends of Israel and the top of the Conservative Party. This has gone on for too long. Money, improper influence, and the promotion of Israeli interests above our own have contributed to the destruction of the UK's independent foreign policy. They've also undermined UNRWA, the UN, and international law, and it all comes at the expense of innocent Palestinians. You need no greater evidence of this than the total silence we saw about Gaza during the election campaign. Likewise, nor was there a squeak about the acceleration of illegal settlement building and repulsive settler violence in the West Bank. These issues have been buried more quickly than Gaza's 40,000 dead. If the Conservative Party is to recover, it cannot do so without admitting and addressing this poison in its midst. It must start by answering clearly some crucial questions about its conduct on the issue I'm addressing today. What happened in CCHQ? Who made the decision to shape and adopt this complaint? Who instructed a press officer to notify the media? What contact was there about this between CFI, the then party chairman, Oliver Dowden, or any others? Will the party now undertake to decouple itself from CFI and direct its efforts to supporting Jewish people within the UK, separate from defending Israeli excess? Will the party perhaps at last come clean on who paid for Priti Patel's trip to Israel, after which she was sacked as Development Secretary?
Is there internal dissent against this control that is being exerted by a foreign power on our own foreign policy?
My experience when in the Foreign Office is there is a lot of deep concern amongst officials and ambassadors about this undue influence. It is tempered, of course, by not wanting to be at odds with the United States, and the next few months will be critical in that judgment. And that's always been the problem, that we don't dare sort of express our view clearly for fear of being at odds with a US president. But I think that what is crucial is that we do have our policy. But even the policy we do have is not properly supported by many in our own government, and that is my point. And there are senior figures in the Conservative Party who essentially have gone behind the backs of due and proper government processes, behind the backs of the Foreign Office, to work directly into and through Number 10 in order to distort that policy and not properly apply it. That is the problem.
We're here with Sir Alan Duncan, who was UK Foreign Minister from 2016 to 2019. You've described the Israeli state influence on the Conservative Party as entrenched espionage in your diaries. Can you just explain a bit how it works? How is that power exerted over the Conservative Party?
Well, we have a proper policy, and I don't object to the policy, which is that settlements are illegal, and that is formed, or has been formed over many years and held for many years through a proper process, through officials, the Foreign Office, and then agreement with Number 10. But what then happens is that that entire process of proper policy making is bypassed behind the scenes by people who go directly into Number 10 and people at the top of Number 10 to say, well, oh, don't say that because it'll affect our donor base, or it'll offend the Jewish community or something. And so what they've done over many years is push policy outside a policy making process to the point where various prime ministers have said, oh, we'll do this or do that, we'll proscribe this organization. And let's look at one, for instance, where Michael Gove was really very underhand on this, in my view, which was putting forward a bill to prevent local authorities from boycotting or even advocating a boycott of illegal Israeli goods. So this was in direct contravention of our stated policy and in support of illegality. And I just find that, which was the result of lobbying from the likes of Lord Pollack of the Conservative Friends of Israel, absolutely despicable.
And can you just talk a little bit about how we've got to this point? Because you've been in the Conservative Party at senior positions for a long time now. It hasn't always been like this. They haven't had such control over the Conservative Party, have they? I mean, Margaret Thatcher definitely did policies which were detrimental to the Israeli state, and that happened. You can't imagine that now. Has there been a radicalization of the Conservative Party?
I think this has grown exponentially over the last 25 years or something like that, born of donor money, a cabal at the top of the party who are like-minded, the growth of utter ignorance about quite what our international obligations are and what international law is, and indeed ignorance of the nastiness of what happens on the ground in the West Bank. I mean, there are too few people in the Conservative Party who call out violent Israeli settlers marauding across Palestinian land on the West Bank, cutting down olive trees, and then the systematic demolition of houses and land theft by the Israeli government itself. I mean, so long as Netanyahu is there, I consider them a rogue state.
And are there many people like you at senior levels in the Conservative Party, or are you a lone figure? I know there's a few others that we know, like Crispin Blunt, but there doesn't seem to be many individuals that are willing to actually just, like you say, state government policy, which is it's not an extreme position.
I mean, it shouldn't be difficult for any of them to state what is government policy, but they don't, for fear of being attacked and undermined by the forces I've been describing. I think there are fewer and fewer people who really have that international experience. I mean, when you have a House of Commons full of local councillors, they're not going to know much about the West Bank.
On Conservative Friends of Israel, because this is the main institution through which this power is exerted, as you say, through these trips that they often pay for new MPs to cultivate them into a certain way of thinking about this issue. Do you think Conservative Friends of Israel should be shut down, or at least have to reveal its funders? Because it seems to me it's outrageous that an institution within a political party that's that powerful doesn't have to reveal who its funders are.
No, its funding is very opaque, and of course one of the great rules of political influence is always follow the money if you can. The word I used was decouple. The CFI, which is trying to impose the extreme policy of another country on UK foreign policy, should be decoupled from what needs to be and should be the proper support of the Jewish community in the United Kingdom. But the conflation of the two and the claim to represent Jewish opinion by the likes of the Board of Deputies and people who I think hold a rather extreme version of Jewish opinion should not be allowed to continue. What you need is the decoupling of domestic Jewish opinion from the foreign policy influence based on Israeli wishes.
And do you hope that your victory is going to inspire people to fight back against the attempted destruction of people speaking out for Palestine?
It will, if I have a bit of help from the world of journalism.